APUS Government students, we're back, and I'm still on the beach. It's a beautiful day. Lecture 5.3. So, we talked last time about the enumerated, expressed powers of the president, veto, pardon, others that are in there, commander in chief. Now we're going to take a look at in 5.3 some of the more controversial powers that presidents have amassed over time. All right. So, because they're informal, because they're not in the Constitution, though presidents base them on things in the Constitution, we look at them as implied, informal powers of the president. So, I utilize in your notes a rocket to symbolize how presidents have increased, boosted their power over time in these ways beyond what is enumerated and expressed in the Constitution. All right, so that's what we're getting at with these. So let's dive into some of these here. All right, so some informal powers in legislation. The first thing that I talk about and mention here is not something that they boost their power with. It's a reality. It's a reality of presidents having someone in Congress sponsor a bill for them and their likelihood of getting it passed into the finish line. And the point is this: presidents have success early and usually not later in terms. All right? Presidents come in with support. They've won the presidency, they've won the electoral college. They've got wind in their sails, so to speak. They've got popularity and they've got an agenda, they've got policies. And it's usually in those first couple of years that presidents really want to hit the ground running and get some signature things passed. You look at our last three presidents, and I know you guys don't know, all of what was going on with their last three presidents, but let me remind you, when Barack Obama was elected, that first term, those first 2 years of his 8 years, he was probably able to pass more things in those first 2 years than he did in his entire 8 years. All right. He was able to pass Obamacare, a number of other things. He had 60 senators that were Democrats like him in the Senate. They controlled the House, Democrats as well. And then Congress began to shift and change. There were more Republicans that were elected. He was not able to get more signature things that he wanted done. And that really frustrated him. When we then look at Donald Trump, his first term, the tax breaks that he had passed, they happened in his first couple years. Joe Biden, yes, becoming president with what was happening with COVID, but he passed a huge infrastructure bill that was in his first 2 years in office as well. So it'll be interesting to see as we're looking at this second time around with President Trump and these first 2 years of this now second 4 years for him. You can see that he's really trying to ramp up and get some things passed in these first couple years. All right, moving on. Partial veto. All right. This comes from a case, so it's not one of our 14, but of Clinton versus New York. And basically, what it says is that presidents cannot go in to pieces of legislation and, in essence, cross things off, sign certain things, veto, cross off other things in pieces of legislation. The Supreme Court has said, no, 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 President. You don't have the power to do that. It's not in the Constitution. Either sign it all or you veto it all. But this has given birth, and these happened before this case, but I think you see them happen more often now, is signing statements. These are one of our first power boosters that we're going to talk about here, where presidents sign a bill into law, but then seemingly in their statement below signing, they object to parts of that bill now becoming a law and talk about sometimes how they're not going to enforce that part of the bill. So, in essence, to me, it seems like these signing statements, to a certain extent, do kind of give this partial veto power. Now, certainly that can be challenged in the courts, and they have been in the past, but you're going to see a question here as we look at now this multiple choice question. You can see signing statements issued, and you can see how many times the presidents have issued signing statements. And sometimes it's just, hey, here's the basics of how I want it enforced, but you can see in the right-hand side of that chart, you're seeing objections the president has with parts of that legislation. And it can happen a lot or a little. I mean, you look at a president like Clinton, he signed more than everybody else of those 4 presidents listed, but only 18% of the time of those 381 or 70 times did he voice objections to parts of that bill. Versus take a look at George W. Bush. Again, I know before your time, but 161 signing statements, but look at that, almost 80% of those 161 did he voice objections to certain things in the bill. Let's get to the answer. Let's take a look at this. President Clinton greatly reduced the use. No, he increased the number of signing statements. He decreased objections. B, there you go. While President George W. Bush issued fewer signing statements than Clinton, his included more objections than Clinton. So B, boom, there's your answer. And you're going to see that on your test. Let's move on to some more informal powers of presidents, some more implied powers of presidents, executive orders. So these are sort of like signing statements, except these are presidents going back to existing laws, not new laws, and directing through an order how a president wants these existing laws to be tweaked or changed, enforced, executed by the agencies and the departments. All right, so you can see now the difference between orders and signing statements. All right, so they're revocable by the next president. You can see they're most popular when Congress won't act, or Congress is controlled by the opposite party, where a president cannot get something passed by Congress. The one that we'll watch a video of here was in Barack Obama's second term, when he was less able to get things through Congress because the Republicans controlled either part or both houses of Congress. He issued executive orders with immigration. That was one of his big things that he was working on in his second term, and he couldn't get them passed by Congress as much as he wanted to. And so he issued some executive orders. Controversy came because of those executive orders and things that he tried to tweak and do with our immigration policy. And we'll watch that SNL skit that ties to this. And again, these are subject to judicial review. All right. All right. Informal powers, foreign policy, executive agreements. These are ways in which presidents are able to get around treaties. So this is how they boost their power with executive agreements. Basically, it's like a treaty without the 2/3 Senate vote. Yeah. So you can see very different, I think most would agree, than what our founders intended. So yeah, this is what presidents do these days. But presidents look at their powers with negotiating foreign policy, and they see themselves as, hey, it's me. I'm making these deals, binding our country with other nations with these executive agreements. Informal powers of the commander-in-chief, powers the draft. Not in the Constitution, but we've seen a number of presidents utilize it over time, pointing to their commander-in-chief powers. Power of suspending the right of habeas corpus. I know that means nothing to you, but look on and read that. Rights of those arrested for alleged war-related crimes. And we can say, well, what president would do that? Well, look, Lincoln, one of our most popular presidents, utilized that during the Civil War. We've seen other presidents throughout times utilize those as well. I think about in my lifetime, George W. Bush, after 9/11, as we're searching for those related to terrorism after 9/11. So the rights of habeas corpus were suspended for those suspected of those terroristic plots, things that happened with 9/11, and other things that were believed to be in the works, excuse me, after that. And that is the end of 5.3. We are done. Just 5.4 left, and I'll see you next time.